Most horror games give you monsters to fight. Splatterhouse gives you a whole mansion with rooms made of flesh, walls that give birth, and whatever this thing is. I'm ranking all enemies to find out which one is the best. But before we get into the roster, here's a little context. Rick Taylor and his girlfriend Jennifer Willis, two college kids majoring in parapsychology, hike into the woods to track down Dr. West's mansion, the home of an expert in their field who mysteriously vanished years ago. Rumor has it he was performing bizarre experiments in his lab. Once inside, monsters come crawling out of the dark. Jennifer gets dragged away screaming, and Rick gets beaten to a pulp. He wakes up with an ancient mask fused to his face. It heals him and pumps him full of supernatural strength. Rick then goes on a rampage looking for Jennifer, crushing every creature in his path. I'm putting every creature in Splatterhouse on trial, scoring each one across 3 categories: Anatomical Crimes, the Would Dr. West Approve rating, and the Nope factor. 5 points per category, 15 total. Only one monster will slither away with the crown. Let's see who takes it. Deadman. The hunched posture and clawed hands make the Deadman look more like a mutation than a decomposing person. The developers wanted a standard zombie appearance, but management said no, so they ended up looking more like aliens with green blood. This actually helped because Deadman feels less traditional and more like something that wandered in from a lab. Reliable undead labor. Nothing he'd put in a research paper. You've seen this in every horror property. The green blood is unsettling, though. Chained Prisoner. Looks human, which is the point. The real wrongness is in how it acts. It vomits when you get close, dissolves, and leaves the mess behind as a trap. That's not creative design, that's just messed up. These don't feel like creatures Dr. West created, but people the mansion shoot up and spat out. Rick can't even fight them, which makes them feel separate from the mansion's normal monster lineup. West Mansion isn't just full of monsters, it makes them. Walking past someone chained to a wall who barfs and melts apart just because you got near them creates a different kind of discomfort than fighting monsters. You didn't do anything wrong, you just got too close. Bat. It's a bat. It's a bat. It's a bat. Top heavy. The swollen head on a withered body looks more like something that evolved incorrectly rather than something stitched together. It feels like a person who grew wrong. The oversized noggin suggests brain tinkering of some kind, which fits the parapsychology research Dr. West had been conducting. It's like a theory he pushed too far just to see what would happen. It shuffles toward Rick like its head is too heavy for its neck, and when you hit it, it pops off and flies at you on its own. It's memorable, but more surprising than scary. Body Eater. A flesh worm with teeth crawling out of a floor that's also flesh is a very specific kind of biological horror, not a generic monster design. The Body Eater doesn't just look wrong, it comes from something that's also wrong, which elevates the creepiness. This is the first real sign that Dr. West was breathing bioweapons instead of summoning demons. When a room literally births creatures out of its own walls, you're looking at a lab experiment gone wrong, or right. The room itself is the enemy. The Body Eaters are proof that it's alive. The floor is literally flesh, wall to wall, writhing and pulsating, with a fireplace in the middle of it like that makes things normal. A single Body Eater is easy to kill and doesn't create lasting dread on its own, but when it's part of a floor that's completely alive, it turns into something else entirely. Tortured Prisoner. The design isn't anatomically wrong, just stripped to nothing. The chained prisoner from stage 1 still had enough flesh to dissolve. These don't. Skeletal figures in chains are disturbing because of what was done to them. These show the human cost of Dr. West's research more clearly than almost anything else in the mansion, because they weren't created, they were used. Namco put a torture chamber in a 1988 arcade game and just moved on. Screaming skeletal figures bleeding from their restraints, going up and down on their chains. Just people Rick has to walk past to find his girlfriend. That's why it works. Hanging corpse. Armless bodies with ropes around their necks are basic mutilation, not clever monster design. But look closer and you'll spot glowing flesh. When struck, they produce green splatter. Those two details make them more than just human shapes. They feel like something the mansion produced on its own over time, rather than something Dr. West engineered with a specific purpose. The hanging corpses drop from dungeon ceilings, and later in the game they hang from dead trees in a forest. Indoors, they're basically decorations that move. Outside, it becomes folk horror. Same energy, but two completely different vibes. You define them as victims instead of enemies, and you want to tiptoe past them carefully. That hesitation is exactly what the game is counting on. Water zombie. It's more of a smear than a creature. You hit it with a stick and it splats on the wall, which is more interesting than anything it does while alive. It comes across as something the sewer generated naturally, not something shaped by the doctor's hands. It exists outside the mansion contamination thesis. Rick is chest deep in filthy water, swinging a stick at sentient blobs rising out of the sludge. The situation is unpleasant. Be thankful these creatures aren't made of caca. Poltergeist. Furniture doesn't become creatures just because they're airborne. A chair is still a chair even when it's trying to kill you. The eye painting does bump the weirdness up a notch. Supernatural possession fits the mansion's contamination logic. When the fight is over, a spirit shoots out of the painting, escapes through the window, and the chandelier drops. The house's influence has soaked into everything inside it, even the furniture. The eye painting almost earns this score by itself. Everything else in the room is startling, but not unsettling. A giant eye staring at you from a framed portrait in an otherwise ordinary domestic space is surveillance horror. The feeling that something has been watching you from inside an object you never thought to question. Undead Dog. The exposed ribcage and open wounds show something horrific happening to a familiar shape. That's more effective than inventing a monster from scratch. The death animation strips the flesh right down to a skeleton before it crumbles. It's a clean design that earns its score. The dogs fit the mansion's biological horror context without clearly suggesting deliberate engineering. They feel like a side effect of the mansion's general contamination. Dogs trigger a panic reflex way faster than humanoids because speed, aggression, and animal unpredictability bypass the part of their brain that analyzes monster designs. Rotting them out and making them hungry amplifies that. If it spots a defeated Deadman, it stops and eats the remains, meaning it's not just a threat to Rick. Nobu. It's way too big for a fetus. It has a mouth on the top of the head, then it spits slime from that misplaced mouth. Every design choice stacks on the previous one, turning it into the most creatively grotesque regular enemy in the game. A mutated fetus roaming a dead forest fits the mansion's biological engineering logic perfectly. It's outside, which means it got here somehow. The name implies something larval, something that shouldn't exist beyond a controlled environment. This thing escaped, it wasn't summoned. When it's curled up, it looks helpless. You approach it thinking it needs help, right before it turns into something that wants to hurt you. That reversal of roles is unsettling no matter how the actual fight plays out. Grabbers. Disembodied arms are anatomically wrong by default, but the hands themselves aren't particularly inventive. What earns this score is the disguise. Bright circles on a wooden bridge that look harmless, until they aren't. It's a kind of anatomical trickery that most enemies don't attempt. These hands feel purely supernatural. Nothing about them hints at a lab origin or some deliberate bioengineering project. Rick steps over what look like wet spots on the planks, and an arm shoots up through the wood, grabs him, and drags him down. The threat was always there, it just looked like something else. That gap between what you think you're seeing and what it actually is creates a kind of dread that obvious threats can't. Pro. The sprite seems to have two sets of red eyes on each side of its face, which is either a deliberate choice or a happy accident. If intentional, something is clearly wrong with this crow. If accidental, Namco stumbled into something unsettling without even trying. It's a bird in a forest. It flies in a straight line and dies in one hit. It generates no dread whatsoever. Biggy Man. Chainsaws for hands, plus exposed muscle tissue visible through torn clothing is a very specific kind of biological nightmare. This thing didn't evolve or materialize from thin air. It's a former patient who got taken apart and put back together using the wrong parts. This guy was explicitly put together by Dr. West, making him the most direct evidence of the Doctor's work in the entire game. He's not a random side effect of the mansion's rot. He's the thesis statement. He is also the only enemy whose body doesn't dissolve or shatter when you beat him. Biggy Man just drops to the floor with his chainsaw still running. Even dead, the mansion refuses to take him back. The chainsaw hands are a clear red flag, but the burlap sack over his head makes it sad. Takashi Oda, the artist who designed Biggy Man, said he doesn't know what's under it, not as a clever mystery, but because he couldn't decide. So nobody, not even the person who created him, knows what it's hiding. That fact is more disturbing than anything else. Mirror Rick. It's just Rick. There's no biological wrongness here at all. The design is identical to the player character, which is the whole point. When defeated, it doesn't dissolve into soup like most other enemies. It turns to dust, with the terror mask sitting on top. Mirror duplicates feel more supernatural than scientific, but Namco isn't being subtle. The Mirror Ricks aren't asking what Rick could become, they're showing you what he already is. A masked figure punching through walls and killing everything in his path. This is straight psychological horror, not a failed experiment. The game forces Rick to look in a mirror, and this is what looks back. Fighting yourself in a mask you didn't choose suggests you were never really in control. It's the most psychologically brutal moment in the whole game. The mask didn't save Rick, it drafted him, and the mansion knew exactly who it was signing up. Evil Cross and Nightmare. Severed heads in various states of decay orbiting a cross are anatomically wrong, but the wrongness here is more symbolic than biological. The heads themselves are well designed, each showing a different stage of damage, which suggests Namco put more thought into them than a typical single-use boss enemy ever gets. West Mansion's corruption extends far beyond the physical. It also warps symbols and spaces meant to hold meaning. Stage 4 ends in a chapel, and Namco drops an upside-down cross with 6 screaming heads shielding it. The Evil Cross stands as the strongest indication that the mansion's reach extends beyond biology into the supernatural. An inverted cross surrounded by severed heads in a dungeon seems like standard Splatterhouse background decoration. But put that exact same image inside a chapel where you're supposed to feel safe, and it becomes absolutely terrifying. This boss was so effective that the TurboGrafx 16 port removed the inverted cross and stripped all the religious imagery from the room. Then they went ahead and put a parental advisory warning on the box anyway. Cowards. Severed hands. A severed hand crawling through a pit of flesh is anatomically wrong by definition, but the little "come here" gesture before it strikes gives it personality, and not the good kind. I'm pretty sure it's flipping you off. An enemy that taunts you is worse than something that simply attacks. Hands crawling around in a pool of meat absolutely track with the mansion's biology gone wrong vibe. They don't feel engineered so much as leftovers from something worse, and that accidental quality makes them even creepier. The beckoning gesture mimics something friendly before you register what it actually is. A severed hand giving you the finger before it attacks is either an ingenious piece of body horror or a joke. Is the mansion winking at you while it tries to hurt you? Joker. Every enemy in Splatterhouse signals danger through ugliness. Then Stage 5 introduces a ghost of a beautiful woman holding a skull like she's about to hand it to you as a gift. No biological crimes are happening here. The horror is happening on a different frequency than anatomical discomfort. A ghost feels folkloric rather than experimental. She comes from a different horror tradition, one built on appearance and deception instead of modification and contamination. She doesn't match the mansion's biological engineering logic as most enemies do, and that makes her stand out. She attacks by dropping the skull on your head. When defeated, she screams and drops it anyway, because even when defeated, she gets the last word. The Joker is the only enemy in the game that uses attractiveness as a threat. Painted face. A female face with glowing eyes breaking out of a gold frame is genuinely wrong in a specific way. The contrast between the ornate frame and what it holds is where the wrongness lives, not just in the face itself. Cursed paintings fit the mansion's supernatural contamination logic well. The mansion's influence has seeped into the art on its walls, the same way it soaked into the furniture in Stage 2. A portrait is a mean to capture life. This one preserved the wrong thing. Effective for a quick scare, but not deeply unsettling once you know what it is. It vanishes when attacked, so it's not even that creepy. Revival Dead. You get two flavors: the slow, moaning shuffler and the fast, screaming sprinter. They're solid, readable enemies. Nothing special, but they get the job done. They keep spawning as long as Master Dead is around, so they are clearly his doing, not random zombies wandering in. A basement full of body parts and a skeleton pumping out an endless undead army feels like a system someone built on purpose, which matches the mansion's whole experimental setup. Familiar enough to register as a problem, without generating too much distress. They're the most standard issue zombies in a game that normally tries harder than that. Master Dead. A skeleton in a white-brimmed hat and rags, possibly a decomposed witch, floats above his zombie army like he's conducting a Harvest Nightmare orchestra. He looks unique, but not anatomically wrong. The horror here is folkloric, which makes him feel like he wandered in from a different game compared to the mansion's usual anatomical aberrations. Nothing about Master Dead suggests laboratory origin or experimental modification. Everything else in West Mansion draws from body horror, slasher imagery, or supernatural possession. It draws from rural dread and harvest folklore, the kind of fear that lives in a cornfield at night. And yet, the floor beneath him is the same writhing flesh mass from the Body Eater room, and the Revival Dead are wading through biological matter up to their shins. A floating scarecrow conducting a parade of zombies through a floor of living flesh is deeply wrong as a situation, even if the design itself isn't anatomically surprising. When defeated, his body disappears and his hat drifts to the floor like a leaf in the wind. It's the most quietly theatrical death animation in the game, and it's the detail that stays with you long after the fight ends. Jennifer Willis. The mutated form keeps enough of Jennifer visible underneath the claws and disproportionate body that you never stop recognizing her. Partial recognition is what makes it worse than a clean monster design would be. Jennifer wasn't engineered by Dr. West directly, but her transformation is the contamination thesis in its most personal form. She entered the mansion human, and the house changed her. Most games before this involved saving the girl and everyone living happily ever after. The developers didn't want to do that. They built the entire game around making this moment land as hard as possible. The monsters surrounding Jennifer all flee when Rick arrives. For a brief moment, the game lets you believe she was safe, then she transforms. Mid-fight, she reverts to human form and begs Rick to help her. then mutates again and laughs. When finally defeated, she returns to human form, collapses, thanks him, and turns to dust in his arms. You're not fighting a creature, you're fighting what's left of someone you love. Embryos. A corridor that looks like the inside of a womb. Flesh walls, veins on every surface, with bubbles materializing containing human-faced embryos. When the bubbles hit the floor, the embryos pop out, leap at Rick, and latch onto him. The human faces are what push this into genuinely disturbing territory. These aren't abstract creatures. They are recognizable as something that should have become a person. At this point, the game stops hinting and just says it outright. The embryo corridor is the mansion's reproductive system in motion. The mansion is pregnant. If Dr. West was engineering life rather than summoning evil, this is the mechanism. These embryos aren't invaders or test subjects. They are offspring. West Mansion is making more of itself. They scream when they hatch. That's the detail that earns this score. The corridor leading to them builds the unease effectively, so by the time the first bubble materializes, you already don't want to be there. Mother. A giant pulsating organ cluster. Dark red, veined, anchored to the wall by tissue that looks decades old. Nothing else in the roster comes close to this level of anatomical imagination. Mother doesn't look assembled or summoned. She looks like she grew here, and that is peak horror design. Everything in the game has been building to this room. The body eater floor in stage 1 was the first hint that the mansion was biological. The embryo corridor was the confirmation. Mother is the explanation. She isn't a boss in the traditional sense. She's the reason every other enemy exists. Dr. West didn't fill the house with creatures. The house fills itself. Understanding what Mother is generates more dread than fighting her. Destroying her makes the mansion catch fire and begin dying around Rick, which means she wasn't just producing monsters, she was keeping the entire structure alive. Flaming bodies. Burning human shapes hit your brain as people before enemy, which works, but there's nothing anatomically clever going on. The scare comes from the situation, not the creature. The fire is doing the heavy lifting. Rick escapes the burning mansion into a forest that's already burning, and what follows him out are people on fire who won't stop moving. They feel like victims of the dying mansion rather than anything Dr. West engineered. They're the mansion's last statement before the final boss. They can't be killed. Rick can only avoid them and keep moving. Watching a human silhouette experience something awful before it even registers as a threat is a specific kind of horror that standard monster designs can't duplicate. Hell Chaos. A massive decaying head with corpse arms striking from underground is genuinely wrong. The geometry doesn't even add up. The hands come from the front of the screen while the head emerges from the sides, implying the creature is lying beneath the arena with Rick standing on its chest. That detail makes Hell Chaos feel more physically real than a floating boss ever could. Takashi Oda mentioned that while drawing Hell Chaos, his right hand went numb and he had to go to the hospital. The arm only healed once he finished the illustration. Make of that what you will. Rick makes it outside, the mansion burning behind him. Then he finds the grave of Dr. West, and the terror mask releases a spirit into it. The mask used Rick to destroy the mansion and free West's soul. Rick was never the hero, he was the delivery boy. Visually, he's just a huge furious face with reaching arms. The dread comes from understanding what he represents, not from the encounter itself. When he dies, a ghostly face flickers above the remains, screams, and dissolves. The mask shatters off Rick's face. Rick walks away. After the credits, the pieces reassemble. The mask laughs. Without the contamination thesis, it's just a big final boss. With it is the punchline to a joke that started the moment Rick put the mask on, and Rick living alive might be the worst outcome. The mask is still out there, and it already knows his face. So, who's the best monster in Splatterhouse? The winner is Jennifer with a perfect score of 15 out of 15. Every creature in West Mansion was designed to be threatening. Jennifer was designed to be someone. The developers confirmed they built the entire game around that moment, because they were tired of stories where you save the girl and everything ends in hugs and kisses. Jennifer was the thesis. Everything else was set up. The rest of the top-tier enemies echoes the same idea in different forms. Mother and Nobu at 14 points, Biggy Man and the Embryos at 13, each rooted in biological transformation rather than supernatural threat. The Evil Cross, Body Eater, and Hell Chaos at 12 points, each revealing a different layer of what the mansion is doing beneath the surface. And then there's Mirror Rick with 8 points, the only entry with maximum nope factor, and the one in Anatomical Crimes. The most unsettling moment in the game has nothing to do with biology, it's just you looking at yourself. The lowest scorers, like the Bat, Crow, and the Water Zombie, are the places where Namco filled space without adding meaning. Yet the ultimate monster in West Mansion walked in with Rick on his face and used him to dismantle the house, infect Jennifer, and deliver itself to Dr. West's grave. Splatterhouse might not be called a masterpiece, but it's smarter than almost anyone gave it credit for in 1988, and Jennifer Willis is the proof. Namco understood that the most disturbing thing you can put in a horror game isn't a monster, it's someone you recognize doing something you can't undo. What about you? Let me know in the comments which monster is your favorite. If you enjoyed this video and would like to support the channel, click the join button to become a member. See you next time!